Everybody know where they want to start the conversation?
Recording in progress.
All right. Who would like to start? Our focus today will be on A Nightmare on Elm Street. So,
Well, I actually want to start with the mom because I felt like while most of the focus is like on her daughters, we also see that she has a really interesting psychiatric history where essentially she led like an angry mob to commit a murder, stole a trophy from the murder, and then an arson. And then hide alcohol around her mouth and being like thinking it separately to the point of confusion and sleepiness.
yes, I think the low hanging fruit first.
Yeah.
It looks like Marge is afflicted with alcohol use disorder. So a couple things. Number one is nowhere in the screening or the assessment is frequency really part of the definition. If you go by the NIAAA, you can actually use frequency, but otherwise the Cage questions, no. And the actual DSM criteria, no, right? But despite that, there is alcohol in almost every scene that she is in. So I did the quick nerd out count, and I could post it on Instagram later, but the majority of scenes in which Marge is either holding a drink or is intoxicated is significant and is significantly over 50%. So even though that really doesn't contribute to, the fact is that she does have alcohol use disorder.
Well, and that last thing too, she was like, stop drinking. Sorry about that. Like, depending on how you your perspective on that last thing, whether it was real or not, but that's what she says, right? And so, even when she was hiding the alcohol in the closet, I think anytime anyone's like hiding alcohol throughout the house, then it was concerned for like kind of addiction or at least feeling have a hide this.
The behaviors are definitely
Yeah,
How's your other observation, sir?
Yeah, for the mom, I was in like when her daughter was trying to explain to her like this she was acquiring ignorance to bring into hallucination, basically. The mom was really denied them. And I think she tried to rationalize them and like intellectualize them in a way that she was trying to kind of cope with that reality. So it gave me some PTSD vibes. And I think like she just like couldn't come to the acceptance stage that like right through her. I think that.
I think going beyond that, her functioning was like very immature for her age and for her role as a mother. And the daughters here like go to school, and so kind of like being like, no, and put down. She's like, okay, let's get back safely.
Yeah, more parenting throughout the whole movie. I was like, these judgment decisions are not good.
And her processing felt like she was a teenager at times, and so I think that also could be like a trauma response. I think trauma is a potential diagnosis. I also wonder about like some of those characterological like decision making kind of things going on. Yeah.
What could have been the trauma?
Especially the murder of this person or like that.
Right, so I mean, who got murdered?
In her mind, I guess Freddy Krueger.
Well, according to her, like this whole thing happened when there were children being murdered in the neighborhood, right? And that led them to commit this act. And whether or not that's true, that's part of the delusion. I think it's harder to tease out, but it seems like there was at least some violence in the community.
So let's assume that we actually did contact some collaterals, and it is true that there was a child murderer and that he was burned alive. What specifically do you think was Marge's trauma?
Perpetrator, they traumatized by
I think they could be.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not really a loved one in that case, right? Which is part of the.
So you think Marge witnessed Freddy Krueger's having been burned alive?
She has a little thing.
As an odd trophy to keep.
Right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Did I pick up on that?
Yeah, it's all, like, implicating her in a crime, but she still kept it.
What's been, why, and I mean, and if you, and we are going down this rabbit hole now, but that also kind of implicates the cat too, doesn't it? Where that came, where that may have come from.
Well, I also feel like the dad definitely knew more about what was going on as well. Because he was very odd throughout the movie about him later. But I do think that that's why she was so upset by the principal that happened
Yep. Why do you think they're separated?
because of that. I think that's why she's drinking too.
Right, drinking, as a sedative for her anxiety, perhaps due to PTSD. Any questions you'd like to ask, Mark?
I'd be curious about like what led up to these decisions to fall in love and do this. Like, was it someone that she knew who he killed? Was it like something that was like very personal? I also wonder was it her husband who forgot to sign the search warrant? Because we know he's a detective.
That's a great observation. And if we were to ask Marge that, what does your gut tell you she might tell us?
That the parents arranged it on their own. It was not through the police, and they tried to forget about it later as if it didn't happen.
Okay. But what about the questions you actually specifically asked?
About the husband or about the
Well, I mean, about the children who were,
I mean, she would say she was worried about her daughter, like she was trying to protect her child.
Yeah.
I do. I don't know if that's true, but I think that's what she would say.
anybody else along those lines want to go? Talk about this? What else might she disclose to us?
Like how she was feeling throughout all of this.
Like, this could have been an older sibling we don't know about who caused was murdered. That could also have been a divorce and a separation. And why the dad was so upset that she was at the crime scene. I mean, it has to be upset regardless, so he was like really upset.
Anybody else? Yeah, the backstory to this is that Freddy Krueger was actually more than just a child murderer. What else was he afflicted with?
He wasn't a child molester. Yeah.
Yeah. So anybody want to ask Marge anything else?
Yeah.
I hope. Okay, but I mean, anybody put two and two together and think that maybe Nancy was abducted? Abducted but not murdered? I mean, if some children go missing in a fictional film like this, what happens happens. But when the daughter of the detective goes missing, additional actions may be taken. And isn't that what exactly happened? I mean, we'd have to ask Marge. I mean, I think it's fair. And I think one of the things that I think definitely flies under the radar, but I don't know if it should. Marge refers to him as Fred. That's odd. Now I know that there's a lot of bias because the world has since known him as Freddy Krueger, and he's become much, much, much more popular and infamous thanks to the multiple sequels and the marketing. Nobody ever calls this guy Fred. Now it may be different back in the mid '80s, but not really. If she were in front of us, I would just an observation. I would ask if she had any insight as to why does she refer to this individual different than literally millions of people.
Maybe that she knew.
So there's some space here for further discussion. All right, anything else for Marge? I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because we actually have some patients to address to see this afternoon. You have a weekend to get to, and we can filibuster your next 48 hours if we wanted to. Anything else with Marge?
My other thought for her, that even the dad, was that maybe she was covering for someone that she knew. Like maybe Freddy Krueger isn't dead, and she knows that, and or whoever committed this, maybe he wasn't the person who committed these crimes. He was just like a scapegoat, and the person who actually committed these crimes could have been Nancy's father. Was my other thought with this,
That's interesting.
because he was so odd. Like when the mom disappears, he doesn't react. He doesn't say anything. Just kind of like walks out of the room with no emotion, no concern. Now I guess you could argue because that didn't happen, and Nancy was just seeing that, right? But throughout the film, he's so bothered by everything. And he uses his daughter as a bait, catch a suspected killer, which makes me feel like he has some traits that are pointing towards like antisocial personality.
That was wild on the phone, where his daughter was like, I'll like make him come out and
Yeah.
catch him and you come and get me. And he was just like, okay. And then
And then he like,
yeah.
like, there's just like breaking windows. He also went into the murder scene where the coroner was throwing up and like ill, and he didn't react at all.
That is interesting. And again, that would go back and certainly lend more support, maybe clarifying a bit why he and March are actually separated.
And it would clarify why she has that weapon, because he didn't actually die in a fire. It would be something that has been left behind.
Planting?
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well,
But I do think he has an antisocial personality trait based on his reactions.
who else want to discuss?
Yeah.
So what the hell was Nancy Thompson? Yeah, I mean, I think it's the first thing to consider, if you want to go down the fan theory that she was one of the Freddie's victims, Fred's victims, but was the one that got away. Largely because of her parents doing what they did. I mean, certainly that experience would lend to future mental illness and perhaps post-traumatic stress, right? No doubt about that. But let's say that in lieu of that conspiracy theory, we have Nancy Thompson presenting with a chief complaint consistent with the plot of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Who do you think is going on?
Oh, I was gonna say, like, just because there's like repeated themes of like these kids having like nightmares, and like her mom takes her to like the sleep clinic, like also just like talk like just like considering like the nightmare and like REM sleep disorder.
Yeah, so I'll call you a couple things there. So number one is this nightmare disorder, right? So we're talking about REM sleep disorders. Is this nightmare disorder? Why or why not?
I was back in sport. Go ahead.
I was just gonna if she can remember it. No.
And some things happen when she's not asleep, like which makes me think that, you know.
Yeah, that is a concerning thing. So I think if this were solely occurring during REM sleep, it's fairly straightforward and it's kind of in the title. But there seems to be more than just nightmare disorder going on by your observation. Sure. REM sleep behavior disorder. Why or why not?
I think that she's like very clean to awake and she's terrible.
Similar, right? Okay. What would have been something that Wes Craven could have included in the script that would allow us to say, oh, that's something I'd expect to appear on the shelf again and would be consistent with REM sleep behavior disorder as most likely diagnosed? Now, REM sleep behavior disorder is a condition in which individuals fail to become paralyzed during REM sleep, which is the norm, and therefore tend to act out their dreams. Which certainly could be happening, right?
Yeah.
What added nuance or quality to the script would have or could support this?
Crazy activity on an evening. So
We did have a brain experience.
yeah.
I mean, I guess she just wouldn't continue this behavior when she's awake, but yeah, wake up at the end, it becomes a big trait. She kind of did. We didn't get to see it. It was like,
I mean,
Yeah.
like not big show.
That's true. Yep. Now, what causes REM sleep behavior disorder, other than the general physiology of the that part of the brain that implements or induces paralysis being turned off.
Like head injuries.
Cause what?
I mean.
What's the structural damage?
super cutting, like, is it-
I don't think so.
Okay, like the brainstem.
Because they created a tongue.
It's a synucleodystrophy,
Oh.
right? There's an abnormal buildup of synuclein, right? Which does kind of run in a group with other conditions like what? Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, Marge doesn't have Parkinson's. Her dad doesn't have Parkinson's, but oh boy, if they were written to the script as having Parkinson's disease, especially Parkinson's dementia, we have something here. But again, Wes Craven's not perfect, and therefore, I'm not so sure she has REM sleep to give to this one. What else?
One thing that's interesting is that we're considering her injuries to not have been caused by Freddy Krueger's. And I think that she's cutting and burning herself, right? The self harm.
Yeah, I mean, very. If you've watched this on the DVD, the Hamlet hijack scene when she leaves Brit Lit class, English literature, she actually burns herself to get out of whatever it is. Her basically her dissociative state. If you're taking the perspective of that teacher, she's dissociating, and she comes out of that dissociation by burning herself, right, on that pipe. So
if you ever put her at risk to like future diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, a lot of those risk factors are active for her.
yeah, which again would certainly be consistent with PTSD as well because of that third variable, that common variable.
I was thinking about, just like a separate point, but the spoiled death or whatever, it's the, concept that you can like share, visions, basically.
So, I want to take that one step further too. I mean, clearly, all four are having the same dream. Look creepy, right?
Yeah.
By the way, remember when we turned the live stream off to let you in on a brief story about third-year medical students that had something similar happen to them? Not that I want to set you guys up for any kind of a horrific experience tonight or tomorrow, but this actually happened. And again, I have an Instagram pic of them as well. I could post that if I remember later too. But nonetheless, you know, the beginning scene when they're walking to school and they're discussing it, having this nightmare with shared content, with universal content, might actually be consistent with or supportive of Jungian theory, right? So, what part of the theory of Carl Gustav Jung might be supported by that dialogue among these four friends? Yeah, you are the collective unconscious. So the idea here is that Jung kind of departs from Freudian theory in that while he embraces Freudian's personal unconscious, he actually kind of builds on that with a second component, the collective unconscious. That is the unconsciousness that is shared universally among everybody because of our common ancestor. And so it's in a way we inherit our ancestors' memories. And since we have a common ancestor, we all share similar memories, albeit in a part that is separate from our own personal unconscious. So when there's this universal purport of this dragger or spirit or entity haunting us in our dreams, and we hear multiple people say the same thing, when we don't share a personal experience, and therefore it can't be due to our personal unconscious, it may be part of that Jungian construct of the collective unconscious. And there is evidence to show that and support Jungian theory. So maybe a little bit more complicated than Folia do. Pardon the pun, any thoughts? But I may or may not come up on a shelf exam, probably not. I don't think you're asked too much on theory.
My thought, I wonder what I would think if someone came in, like for example, Rob, and was like, "Yeah, my girlfriend died," like, and I was there, but I don't know what happened. Like someone else was there, and she was like, she had a nightmare and it killed her, basically. I definitely would be like, "So this person is trying to cover up their crime." And probably did commit this murder. And so it's interesting that he gets murdered in the next scene, right, by the suicide, or like the fake suicide, like flow of a suicide. And he's murdered with a delayed screw stone fall. It was like the most, like least bloody, least like violent. And I can't help but wonder like the need to stage it as a suicide when he was gonna go ahead and kill Glenn afterwards anyway.
It's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is true. I never-
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. That is an interesting observation. Yeah. Let's continue with Nancy. What else is in our differential diagnosis? So nightmare disorder, or identifying clinically significant nightmares, rule out nightmare disorder versus post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Rule out REM sleep behavior disorder. Any other REM pathologies? Why isn't this night terrors or sleep terror disorder?
Because he remembers it.
Yeah.
And when she comes to, she's really not disoriented,
Yeah.
right? And then and she can be awoken from, right? So very inconsistent with sleep terror disorder.
Maybe we're thinking on hallucination.
Definitely could be.
So,
Yeah, definitely could be. Right. So hypnagogic hallucinations are hallucinations, usually visual, that are experienced upon falling asleep, or hypnopompic or something similar, but the time frame is upon awakening.
Is that usually seen in just like epilepsy or can be seen?
It could be seen regardless, but certainly narcolepsy is the most common, I think the most common answer you're going to see in shell fixing.
Okay.
the other thing is that she takes that no sleep medication. That's like really vague. I'm not sure what it was. She took it after the stuff began, so I don't think it like is underlying her diagnosis, but it could be worsening or something.
Absolutely, yeah, that's exactly right. The time frame is such is that she's actually taking those medications not to fall asleep because of what happened to her. So it clearly, beginning that medication is clearly and temporarily unrelated to the onset. However, yes, it could definitely be perpetually. Remember, again, not so much for your examination, but for clinical purpose, not only should you always think of things along the biopsychosocial spectrum, but also what predisposes, precipitates, and perpetuates. And those probably caffeine pills perpetuate for sleep disorder. What else is our differential? I mean, you kind of addressed it, but you're kind of right around the joint. So it's like, well,
Like three psychotic disorders at the time. But
somebody say narcolepsy,
oh yeah, it used to.
right? Why, what other aspects of this are consistent with narcolepsy?
He was kind of fine.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if it's just because she's tired and trying not to sleep. Yeah. Honestly, but
Yeah, and that's one of the things that it has to be a differential diagnosis is catch up from sleep deprivation. Yeah, but it's definitely in the differential here. What else supports narcolepsy as a working diagnosis here?
I mean, the hallucination.
Yeah, and there's both hypnopompic and hypnagogic hallucinations. She seems to have a REM pathology. And oh, by the way, it's highly metaphorical, but she definitely has REM intrusion into non-REM periods, right? I mean, Freddy Krueger does invade her wakefulness, right? So, and if Freddy is a nightmare, more specific, he is himself REM pathology. That REM invasion is what is diagnostic of narcolepsy. Now, how would you diagnose it? Yeah. No, the sleep study, the general or routine polysomnography is not going to be the single best answer. But be careful because they may include as answer A. The real answer is going to be either C or D. So what specific type of polysomnography would you order in such a case? It's called a multiple sleep latency test. So it's a polysomnography in which the individual undergoes multiple 20-minute naps. And if you go into REM within 20 minutes during one of the naps, 50% of the time, it's considered to be diagnostic. Right. And even though they don't order the MLSP, MSLT, multiple sleep latency test. They kind of revert to doing it anyway because of what happens. And she absolutely goes into REM before 20 minutes.
Yeah, I remember when she was talking to me on the phone, she's like, I'm ready in 20 minutes. And I was like, how are you gonna set the trap and fall asleep into REM sleep in 20 minutes?
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
And if you have
I
narcolepsy,
guess so.
and the great irony is that in this is when she talks, I think it's a sleep tech, it maybe it's a doctor. But when she talks to him at the polysomnography, she actually asks, can you just give me a pill so I can stop dreaming? And while his answer is medically accurate for all intents and purposes, there is some discussion to be had. That is, if her pathology is in fact due to narcolepsy, there are medications FDA approved for this, right? So he's not entirely correct when he says no. So what's the general approach if we were to rule Nancy Thompson in for narcolepsy?
As a treatment. So like your daytime staying on, like you can do it augment sleep at night.
Yeah. Augment sleep by disrupting REM, right? If we're dealing with REM intrusion, we want to disrupt REM so that it's less likely to intrude. Lighter stages of sleep, stage 1, stage 2, or even wakefulness, right? And there are multiple medications now FDA approved. What one is most likely to appear on a psychiatry shelf is anything that has a significant anticholinergic side effect, like the tricyclic antidepressants. So protriptyline was commonly used for this very reason. Protriptyline at that time, and stimulant like Ritalin in the morning.
Is that really genetic now?
It does have HLA, DR2, yeah.
So I think maybe that's why they were acting from the house. Because they didn't want to be a family that they were.
Yeah, we don't see her by them, do we?
Well, they just bring them, they were already in the private.
Awake.
Yeah, yeah. I know.
Okay.
Other observations for Nancy here. Let's look a little bit on Freddie. All right, so not really much to go with when we discover he's a child murderer, but pedophilia. All right, so what is the designation of pedophilia with DSM-5?
Like what category?
Yeah. So there are 3 chapters in the DSM that are outlining the sexual disorders. Number 1 are the sexual dysfunctions. What I would strongly encourage you to do to study for your shelf is get your favorite board review text. I don't see any one of them up here. And bring up the image of the sexual response cycle. And as you study for the sexual dysfunctions, you could then note that there are an average of 2 per each stage of that sexual response cycle. It really outlines things very clearly for you, right? The next is gender dysphoria, where an individual is dysphoric, depressed, due to the mismatch, the concordance between their biological sex assignment, that is at birth, versus their gender identity. And I haven't seen the studies yet, but the early indication is that antidepressant therapy is significantly less helpful for gender dysphoria when compared to major depressive disorder. So for any illness, we always think biopsychosocially. For this particular illness, we really, really, really have to think biopsychosocially with less emphasis on the biological. We just don't have the outcomes for antidepressant treatment that we do for major depressive disorder. The third and final designation are the paraphilias or the sexual deviancies, of which pedophilia or pedophilia is one of them. Right? That's Freddie. What are the other paraphilias that are likely to appear on a shelf exam? So I think in studying these, the one thing that I really, really want you to remember is that in every single case, the individual engages in the behavior for sexual gratification. And I think that while that's intuitive and obvious, please keep that in mind, right? And when, whether you presented this on a PowerPoint or if you're just reviewing this in the DSM, that line is there for every single one of these conditions. So we'll state that now and we'll agree that it applies to all of the above so that we don't have to repeat ourselves every single time when we identify the actual behavior. All right. Arson?
Like for some people are related to sexual pleasure.
It wouldn't be called arson then. So arson's a crime. So fire setting, pyromania is by definition not committed for sexual pleasure. So again, if you're going to use the P word, the answer is no. So general fire setting that isn't due to an impulse that an individual can't fight off, i.e. pyromania, or due for some financial benefit, some external incentive. That's arson. But instead, due to sexual gratification, absolutely, we'd call that probably paraphilia not otherwise specified. Or the way the DSM-5, others / specified, or whatever terminology they currently use for what was previously the NOS category. As such a situation exemplifies, there are just way too many behaviors where people can actually get sexual gratification from to publish in the DSM. I mean, it would be the biggest book ever, literally ever.
Yeah.
So we publish or we find evidence-based data to support the more common ones, and then everything else, and I mean everything else, goes under this unspecified category. All right, that makes sense? Okay. You guys want to share with me how you learned the planets? Anybody remember? I think it's a song. You could. I'm not going to make you sing it.
I don't know, something like that.
Right, and that's usually what the acronym, I mean, universally includes, right? My very educated mother.
Yes. ...
Right? Which begs the question: what about your very educated father? Because I never hear him in this, right? So we're going to answer that question right now and apply it to what we're learning, so that these are easily identifiable on your shelf exam. My very educated father serves porn for grills. Believe me, that's easy. It's easier to remember than the plots. All right. So, following that acronym, can you name me every single paraphilia that is classified and published in the DSM-5? Let's try to go in order. My. You explain that syllables?
Yeah.
What is massive now? And I'm only going to say this once because it's just way too many syllables on a Friday. The DSM-5, as of 2013, does make a significant differentiation between masochism and masochistic disorder. All right. Obviously, one is a behavior, which, if agreed upon by two consenting adults, is never considered disorder. On the other hand, when it results in clinically significant distress or impairment, then the D word comes in. Masochism transforms into masochistic disorder. To keep things real simple, we'll use the abbreviated labels for this discussion, where masochism means masochistic disorder, as does every other paraphilia we're about to name. All right. What is masochism? Yeah. Inflicting or receiving? Yeah. Very V. Voyeurism, which is what?
Like the public display of sexual pleasure and watching. Yeah.
Watching, yeah, not the display. Well, hold that in mind though. Educated. Was that the vision?
Yeah, it's just funny.
Father, right?
That fetish disorder.
What is? Is it?
Pleasure and very specific in inanimate objects, usually not sexual objects.
Exactly. Well, it has to be not sexual, right? Vibrators don't count. It's actually in the DSM. S, serfs. What is sadism? P, porn. F4, what?
Yeah.
Frauderism, good, frauderism, which is,
Exposing yourself.
What's that?
Oh, like touching or rubbing again.
and then the final one, thrills, T, good, transvestite fetish, right? So if you have to flip, 'cause there's two Fs, put frauderism first and then fetish next to last, because then you never forget transvestite fetish. They're both a fetish, but transvestite fetish was so common that the APA pulled it out and created its own subcategory, where an individual finds sexual gratification in cross-dressing, where the opposite sexes clothes serve as a fetish object.
What is like the kind of thinking on that diagnosis? Like, I mean, just hearing that word, I cringe a little. It doesn't look like it, like, we know like gender identity is like very fluid and like many people just want to dress. like,
It has nothing to do with gender
Yes,
identity.
but could you explain?
Sure, if you're wearing the opposite sex's clothes, and if you are A, experiencing sexual gratification as a result of it, and B, that is resulting in clinically significant distress or impairment, then you have transvestite fetish disorder or fetishistic, I can't pronounce it, fetish disorder. Right, very clear.
Mhm.
Somebody could cross-dress and not be finding any sexual gratification from it, and then that's perfectly normal. Or they can, which would be transvestite fetish, but if they're not incurring any clinically significant distress or impairment, it's not a disorder.
Mhm.
Right? So you do have to know the operational definitions of each of those.
Right.
Anything else with Freddy Krueger?
It's pretty effective on fire. If someone looking at that, like when she would, that was the one time that you were like, no, it's pretty distracting. And she just was murdered about right away, supposedly.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting about the most emotion.
Yeah. So it's probably some element of PTSD as well, with some irony that his probably in some way does parallel both Marge as well as Nancy.
It was a stretch, but I was like, still going with the event because I was a little confused. And I saw some people in chat that I was like, Freddy Krueger could be like temporarily defeated, but never like really go away. So I was just thinking for that, like, patients can be like treated for the conditions or treated for schizophrenia or narcolepsy or whatever it is. But like that underlying diagnosis is still there.
Yeah, I love the metaphor with narcolepsy.
Mhm.
Right? So it's exactly right. We manage, we don't cure.
Yeah.
And I think the ending fits perfectly there. Yeah, which interestingly was not the original ending.
Well,
The original ending was that the four drive away happy and Marge waves goodbye happily. That, which would have been inconsistent with narcolepsy, the single best diagnosis, and the idea that, okay, so we're cured. Yeah, so.
I would think that, yeah, actually, it's a negative.
The whole thing was a,
yeah.
all right. Any final thoughts? All right, leave it there.